Kazuhito is a worthless virgin loser who was so obsessed with a baddie author that he got shot trying to save her. However, everything suddenly changes after he reincarnates as her dog, only to learn that she is actually a psycho that only wants to fulfill her freaky fantasies with him. It all starts on the day Kazuhito went to read a book by his favorite author. Suddenly, a robber lets off a shot to scare everyone. Kazuhito quickly gets up, but the robber notices another chick named Natsuno casually writing at the table and orders her to stand up as well. She ignores him, so he walks over to put a hole in her skull, but Kazuhito suddenly thinks it would be a good idea to wrestle the gun away from him. Unfortunately, he gets pushed back and ends up getting shot in the head, while Natsuno keeps writing like nothing happened. His soul starts drifting to the afterlife. However, after recalling that he hasn't finished his favorite author's series, he starts begging the gods for a second chance. All of a sudden, he wakes up in a store and sees a suspiciously large man named Afro saying something about having to buy food. Just then, Kazuhito spots a mirror and realizes that he got reincarnated as a dog. Later, he spirals into a mental breakdown because being in a cage stops him from finding the books he so desperately wants to read. He eventually accepts his fate but keeps calling the name of his favorite author to keep the dream alive. Days later, Natsuno suddenly walks in and demands to buy him while asking if he is the voice she keeps hearing. After chopping up his cage, she pays Afro and immediately takes him back to her place for a brutal interrogation about who he is, but he gets confused by the fact that she can hear him and asks how. She then explains that she can apparently hear his thoughts for some reason, which is how she found him in the first place. He then takes a closer look and remembers seeing her at the cafe, so he reminds her of robbery. Upon hearing this, she frees him and quickly takes a shower before putting on a freaky performance with her plots to reward his sacrifice. She then takes him to her library, since he spent the last few days crying about books. But after letting him experience the joy of finally seeing books, she asks why he kept calling her name from the shop. He then explains that it is the name of his favorite author, but she reveals that it is actually a pen name she came up with to protect her real identity. The shock of realizing that she is the author he spent years gunning to almost gives him a heart attack, but he remains composed and happily accepts his new life as her telepathic puppy. However, a couple days into his new happy life, he sees a news report about the robber that murked him and gets depressed, so she offers to take him out. After leaving her apartment the following day, they spend most of the morning strolling through town and make a stop at Afro's shop to exchange greetings, but Natsuno's death stare instantly traumatizes him, so they keep it pushing. The next moment, dollar store Goldilocks, who is usually called Maxie by her fans, suddenly puts on a show to receive her daily dose of validation, but Natsuno refuses to acknowledge her worthless existence and keeps walking with Kazuhito. Shortly after this, they make it to his apartment complex. So he asks why she would bring him here, and she explains that it's the only way to get revenge for what happened to him. Using a key she obtained from her police cousin who worked on his case, she opens the door to one of the apartments, which he uses as a library, and says the robber is likely using his main room, since no one else would think to look for him there. Kazuhito tries to call her a nutcase for even thinking that, but then they hear someone moving next door and make it out just in time to see the robber running away. Natsuno immediately chases after him until he eventually stops at a bridge to fight back. After her first punch almost snaps her wrist in half, he attacks with two of her latest books and nearly shatters her skull with the brutal combinations. However, she keeps taking the hits like it's nothing, which surprises Kazuhito, until she gets close enough to unleash a deadly slice with her scissors that cuts open the pockets he used to hide books in his coat. With his defense mechanism destroyed, she rearranges his insides with a nasty combination before knocking him unconscious and leaving him spread out on the bridge railing. The next moment, she tells Kazuhito to push him over as revenge for what he did. But Mihairo decides to forgive the robber. After he claims to have no anger about what happened, Natsuno gets emotional and says she can't forgive herself for being the reason he is no longer human, but he continues insisting that it wasn't her fault, for obvious simp-related reasons. Natsuno refuses to listen and decides to throw him off by herself, but then Kazuhito shoves her to the ground and reminds her that he was in his right senses when he decided to fight an armed psycho who was twice his size. He further tells her to stop feeling bad about it, because he loves his new life, so she agrees to let the robber live and starts heading back home with him. However, at one point, he remembers that his old place is still unlocked and starts panicking because someone might take his books. She then uses that opportunity to joke about getting pregnant for him, but he ignores the fact that she might be mentally troubled and says he would never do it with someone who skipped the growth phase. Days later, Kazuhito wakes up to find a silver-haired lady passed out on the center table, so he tries to investigate, only to hear a suspicious laugh from her. He initially fears that she is an escaped psych ward patient until she suddenly stands up and tweaks out like a possessed nun. She then starts reciting something from a popular show while Kazuhito wonders if Natsuno would be able to control her anger when she gets back. The next moment, Natsuno walks in, so he prepares to see a bloodbath, but she calmly tells Psycho Lady to chill and even refers to her as sensei. This naturally leaves our boy stunned. Then he notices her business card and realizes that she is Suzuna, the famous editor in charge of every publication. As he stops worrying about her safety, she asks Natsuno for the latest edition of her series. And when Natsuno complains about writer's block, she starts suggesting activities for inspiration, but Natsuno claims to be uninterested in all of them. The next moment, Suzuna suggests getting melon implants because having no milkers is probably why she struggles with inspiration. Upon hearing this, Kazuhito says a prayer for her soul and watches with fear as she continues teasing Natsuno by flexing her massive racks. When Natsuno finally attacks with her scissors and cuts her shirt a little, Kazuhito steps in and tells her to stop acting like a psychopath. But Suzuna starts asking for more because she actually loves the abuse. Before leaving, Suzuna then shows her an article about a slasher that recently started attacking innocent civilians, but Natsuno barely pays attention to it. However, a couple of days later, Suzuna brings it up again because the slasher has been racking up victims. So Natsuno suggests using herself as bait to catch him and promises to give her all the freaky torture she wants as a reward. After Suzuna agrees to this and leaves, Natsuno decides to summon her inner Sherlock Holmes since she is too bored to write anything. First, they make a stop at the store where the slasher attacked his first victim and learned that he only attacked a chick that was reading one of Natsuno's books. Minutes later, they run into a corporate slave who also happens to know one of the victims, and just like the first chick, they hear that he was only attacked because he was reading one of Natsuno's books. After hours of investigating, they both spot the gym bros Natsuno usually trains with and immediately turn back to avoid the stench of gym locker and expired creatine. However, while heading back home, they spot Maxie, who then resumes her taunting and insults on Natsuno. As usual, Natsuno acts like she doesn't even exist, but when Maxie starts explaining how she is the better idol author and displays her massive milkers to prove it, this finally causes Natsuno to get upset, so she grabs her scissors to attack, but Maxie's bodyguard snatches her up and leaves. Later on, Natsuno and Kazuhito try to compare all the information they have received, but then they see a crowd gathered around Afro's pet shop and rush in to see what happened. After learning that the slasher chopped off a chunk of his hair, Natsuno carefully looks around the crowd until she sees a suspicious person and immediately chases him. Kazuhito, on the other hand, eventually stops playing with Afro's hair and notices one of Natsuno's books in an alley, but having a brain the same size as a walnut causes him to ignore the obvious trap, so he walks right into it. Before the day his brains got blown out, Kazuhito had a mildly regular life solely because his hot sister Madoka always made an effort to spend time with him. Despite being famous, she was obsessed with always being around him and would always ask him for advice about the guys she was seeing, like a virgin nerd like him could help with her boy troubles. He also got used to being with her and loved that she was interested in his books, so he put up with her daily rants but could never get over the fact that she was a terrible cook. Minutes after getting trapped in the basket, he wakes up tied in his old apartment and gets surprised when he sees Madoka, who then expresses how much she has missed him. While all this is happening, Natsuno keeps chasing after the suspicious person, but they eventually get away and drop one of her books in the process. Back in Kazuhito's place, the real shock sets in when she actually starts responding to him, so he starts asking how on earth she knew that he got reincarnated as a dog. However, after a couple more minutes of chatting, he realizes that she can't actually understand what he is barking, but this further terrifies him since she has been having a full-on conversation like they are besties. After an incredibly long yap session about how she loves him and can't wait to spend the rest of her life with him, she decides to make him her special curry. However, one look at the culinary abomination she whipped up causes his sweat pores to start leaking. As she gets closer to stuff it down his throat, he starts begging the reincarnation gods for another miracle, and they actually answer him because she suddenly decides to go buy some extra seasoning. As soon as she leaves, Kazuhito spots Natsuno, who has apparently been watching from the window to figure out what kind of depraved chick Madoka is. Shortly after this, he gets tied up in her apartment because she now believes that he is cheating on her with Madoka. As she prepares to chop off his glizzy as punishment, he explains that Madoka is his sister, but she misunderstands and thinks he is coming up with names to protect her. After he finally explains it in a way her slow brain can understand, she frees him from the ropes and asks why his own sister would kidnap him to fulfill her freaky Alabama fantasies. He then explains how surprised he is by the fact that she even knows it's him before asking why she suddenly ran off and left him at Afro's shop. After explaining how she was too slow to catch a random creep in sweats, she tells him about the book and says they are definitely connected to the slasher's choice of victims. After clowning her for losing their only lead, he asks if she can think of anyone with a grudge against her, so she takes a minute to think but gets even more confused than before because her haters could probably easily fill up a small nation. Kazuhito then asks if she can stop yapping for a minute so he can think, since she clearly doesn't have enough brain fuel to keep track of her enemies. The next moment, he remembers that Madoka trapped him with one of Natsuno's books and fears that she might be connected to the slasher, since they only attack her readers. Since she can read his mind, Natsuno quickly catches on and says Madoka is definitely the slasher before grabbing her scissors and promising to make her pay for kidnapping him. Kazuhito immediately asks if she has finally lost it, because there is no way she is attacking his sister, but she insists on punishing Madoka no matter what. The next day, they both head out to continue looking for clues, but Natsuno starts complaining about how she couldn't get any sleep because a certain someone kept making weird noises all through the night. Kazuhito then reminds her that it only happened because she decided to get freaky with him in the middle of the night. And as she tries to justify her actions, Suzuna shows up and apologizes for not finding any new information about the slasher. After saying that she only learned about the books, she patiently waits for Natsuno to verbally assault her before dropping to her knees to climax. At this point, Kazuhito has already accepted that she is a nutcase, so he decides to ignore her. But before leaving, she tells Natsuno about a girl the locals said had spent the entire night crying in the park while burning up one of her books. Upon hearing her description, Kazuhito fears that it might be Madoka again, so they immediately walk to the park and find a few pages that barely survived the fire. Right then, Madoka shows up to get Kazuhito and demands to know who Natsuno is. As expected, Natsuno immediately prepares for a fight and promises to cut her until her brain nudges back into place. As they both square up for the fight, Kazuhito rushes in between them, but then both scold him for interrupting, so he steps aside and tries to reduce the tension with his words. After much persuading, Natsuno decides to spare her but first asks if she actually burned the books, so Madoka explains how much she hates the books. The next moment, Natsuno drops a smoke bomb and quickly escapes with him, while Madoka desperately calls out to him. Back at the apartment that night, he expresses how surprised he is by the fact that she was actually the slasher, but Natsuno tells him that it's actually not that surprising. He still remains confused, so she reminds him that all he ever did before the fatal robbery was to read and tell Madoka about books whenever she tried to hang out with him. This obviously caused her to feel bad, but she decided to put up with it until after he got murked. The painful loss of someone so dear to her must have hurt to the point where she started looking for someone to blame and settled on the author of his favorite books, since the whole reason why he even moved away from home was to enjoy his books in peace. After she further explains that everything Madoka is doing is probably just her way of coping with the trauma, Kazuhito realizes how wrong he was for ignoring the fact that his family would obviously still be in pain. He then asks Natsuno for help with Madoka, because if she continues lashing out to deal with her pain, they would have to figure out a way to stop her. This surprises Natsuno since he doesn't usually share his feelings with her, so he explains that her psychotic personality hasn't stopped him from seeing the good in her heart. After also admitting that she really likes him, she tells him to get ready right before Madoka crashes in through the window and grabs him. She then tells him that she had already anticipated losing him again, which is why she installed a tracker in his collar to make sure they can never be separated again. After giving Kazuhito a moment to take in the shock, Natsuno asks her if she intentionally broke in despite knowing that she is the Akiyama Shinobu, but Natsuno gets shocked by this. She then accuses her of stealing Kazuhito away from her with her stupid books, but Natsuno continues rage baiting and says she could have just used the door if she only came to yap. Upon hearing this, Madoka blames her for everything that happened and says the only reason Kazuhito came back as her smelly pet is because he is too obsessed with the garbage books she writes. However, Natsuno tells her to stop acting like a crack addict because there is no way Kazuhito would come back as a dog and not find his family first. While she insists that he is really in the afterlife chatting with the ancestors, he starts getting worried about the tension rising between them both. Natsuno further adds that Madoka can blame her all she wants, but she still has to face reality because it won't change any of what already happened. When she suddenly asks if this wannabe Avenger act will actually make Kazuhito proud to say he is her brother, Madoka tells her to shut up because she knows absolutely nothing about Kazuhito. This causes Natsuno to lose it, so she tells Madoka to stop acting like she knows what he wants, because he definitely wouldn't approve of anything she is doing. Madoka then asks how she could ever know what he might want, so Natsuno explains how dedicated she is to her readers and says she passes her thoughts to them through the books. She then says that Kazuhito had got his brains blown out because he was protecting her like any true fan would. After she also says that it's why she will continue writing for him and putting all her best into her books without forgetting his sacrifice. Natsuno finally agrees that Kazuhito wouldn't approve of her recent actions. However, despite accepting her own faults, she suddenly grabs Kazuhito and jumps right out of the window, causing him to nearly lose bladder control. After crash landing in an open field, Kazuhito takes a moment to get his breathing under control while she starts feeling terrible about her actions and says there is no way her brother came back as a midget dog. She then apologizes for kidnapping him and explains that she deluded herself into thinking she would be able to find him in this city, which was why she came. The trap in the alleyway was actually her last hope, because only a slow nerd like him would actually fall for it, which was why she thought it was really him. She goes on to say that she can't keep running from reality and decides to finish what she started by defeating Natsuno once and for all. Right then, Natsuno shows up and reveals that she also put a tracker in his collar, shocking Kazuhito, who then asks why they are both treating him like an object. Madoka immediately challenges Natsuno, and as soon as she agrees to fight, she summons her special weapon called Tuna Eater, which catches Kazuhito off guard. Natsuno also unleashes her scissors, and after the usual yapping and insults, they both charge in for the actual fight. After minutes of trying to cut each other down, Madoka transforms her weapon into a chainsaw and starts ripping through all the trees around in an attempt to split Natsuno into two. However, this causes her to get stuck to a tree, giving Natsuno an advantage, which she immediately uses to break the Power Rongear's chainsaw. The constant failure finally causes Madoka's heart to snap, as she realizes that all her efforts and psychotic stunts have led to absolutely nothing. However, she still musters a higher level of Delulu and unleashes a cannon, which she then uses to blast Natsuno, but the law of common sense gets trashed when Natsuno casually splits the cannon in two with scissors. Madoka gets shocked and immediately drops to her knees to accept defeat. But in a surprising turn of events, they both become besties and start chatting on their way to the train station. During their conversation, Natsuno asks Madoka why she cut her books at the park, so she explains how Kazuhito once told her it was better to tear books apart or burn them since selling them affects the author's royalties. This surprises Natsuno because it means she never wanted to disrespect the books, so she asks why she went around slashing readers. When Madoka asks what she is talking about, Natsuno explains the multiple attacks they have been investigating, but Madoka claims to have no idea about it, causing them both to realize that the slasher is still out there somewhere. Hours later, Kazuhito seemingly goes nuts as he starts calling to the air outside the apartment and demands to know who is hiding. Right then, Suzuna reveals herself and asks how long he has known the truth, and he replies that he first suspected it when she said he and Natsuno were ganging up on her during Natsuno's verbal assault session in the city the other day. Suzuna then asks him how much he knows, so he explains all the obvious cues she ignored while cooking up the slasher rumor, which coincidentally kept happening in places Natsuno easily had access to. Suzuna then claims that she did it for Natsuno so she could get over her writer's block, and further says that she is willing to do anything for Natsuno to make sure she remains at the top as the best idol writer. When he says she can get inspiration on her own, Suzuna refuses to accept that Natsuno doesn't need help, so he tells her he believes in her since she also believes in her readers. Upon hearing this, Suzuna insists on the fact that she will do anything to see Natsuno succeed as one of the best writers in history. She then admits to being surprised that he is already this close to her, and says she might get an even stronger dose of inspiration if he were to suddenly lose his life. Naturally, this causes him to get scared of what she might do, but she tells him not to worry and turns to leave while saying that he can't do anything to stop her. As she starts heading out, Natsuno suddenly calls her from the rooftop and completely ignores gravity as she casually jumps off. After revealing that she had also noticed what Suzuna was up to, she orders the shameless creep to sit on the floor for her punishment, and Suzuna immediately obeys. Natsuno then says that she will never need help to deal with her writer's block and says she has already gotten over her current slump before, throwing a whole manuscript into the air. While Suzuna starts picking them all, Natsuno tells Kazuhito that she was suddenly able to write after the freaky punishment she put in through the other day. The next moment, Suzuna glances through the pages and loses control of her water fountain, as she never expected it to be so good. After cussing her out for being so shameless, Natsuno gets excited about being able to write again, but Kazuhito tells her to stop overestimating herself because she still has to finish the latest edition of a series called Lust. At a train station the next day, while Madoka prepares to leave, Natsuno then tells her to think of Kazuhito as her brother. It will help her feel better about losing him. She also tells her to come over whenever she needs to talk about something, so Madoka thanks her for being so kind after everything and leaves. Kazuhito then expresses his concern about the slasher incident, so Suzuna reveals that she actually ran into the real culprit while cooking up the story and dealt with him before even telling them about it. This causes Natsuno to get pissed because the entire investigation was pointless, so she decides to spend the day punishing Suzuna. Several days later, Kazuhito decides to go shop for some books, but while waiting to be attended to, he suddenly starts getting worried and hopes that a girl named Yahyoi won't show up. However, as he prepares to leave after getting the books, she shows up and spends the following minutes manhandling his fur until he passes out. She then tells him that she might be leaving this city too. Before another painful tickling session, Shortly after this, he returns home and Natsuno immediately accuses him of cheating on her because she can still read his mind and he has been thinking of Yayoi this entire time. As she threatens to snip off his magnum for disrespecting their relationship, he defends himself and claims Yayoi is just a friend, but she refuses to believe him. He then tells Natsuno that Yayoi mentioned something about leaving the city soon, which means that he won't be able to buy books from the store anymore, and as he gets sad by the thought of it, she asks why he can't just use another bookstore. After giving it some thought, he claims that it would be impossible to switch up on his favorite store so easily because there is a deep story between him and the bookstore. He goes on to ask if she wants to hear why, but Natsuno tells him to keep the sob story to himself because she has other important things to focus on. As she focuses on her writing, he starts talking to himself about Yayoi, but since she can hear his thoughts, she eventually gets pissed at him because he keeps focusing on her. Out of curiosity and concern that he might actually have a freaky relationship with Yayoi, she decides to listen to him and drops the scissors to make him comfortable enough to spill all the details. Kazuhito then begins to recount the story from last spring, which was when he first entered school and moved to the city to get a new place away from his family. On that day, he was supposed to meet his apartment manager, but since he showed up a little earlier than expected, he suddenly began to crave books and decided to pass time at the nearest bookstore. Upon entering the store, he fell in love with the collection of books there, but his attention quickly diverted to a senior citizen who had just returned a book and apparently hated everything about it, as she kept yapping about how it was boring and went as far as saying that the whole store should be closed for it. Kazuhito realized that it was one of Natsuno's books and immediately lost his cool. While the cashier tried to convince her, she kept acting like a lunatic, so Kazuhito stepped in and verbally assaulted her for losing the brain cells necessary for understanding such a book. However, several minutes into his long speech, Yayoi told him to chill out because the lady had already left the store. Right then, an old man who happened to be the owner suddenly attacked with a baseball bat, but he managed to dodge it. So Yayoi quickly explained that he had actually saved her from the real problem, who already left a couple minutes ago. Upon hearing this, the old man deeply regretted his actions and dropped to his knees to apologize to Kazuhito. He then said that Kazuhito could take any book he wanted as compensation, and the Book Avenger immediately used this opportunity to look for one of his favorites. The old man noticed this and was impressed by his selection, so he gave him even more books for free, as well as a point card to use whenever he came around. This caused Kazuhito to become a regular, as there was no other bookstore that went to such lengths just to make him happy. With the boring history lesson complete, Kazuhito says that the point card he received keeps a record of the books he has read and is proof of his friendship with the old man. However, he then notices that one of his most emotional experiences is basically a sleeping pill for Natsuno. The following day, he heads to the store to figure out what is actually going on, but just as he arrives, he meets Yayoi, who then leaves the shop upset and suddenly carries him along as she runs off to a park. Once there, she starts complaining about how her sister doesn't care if the store closes and says everyone is acting like it's no big deal. She goes on to reveal that it's the main reason why she came up with a perfect plan to save the store, which is basically just wearing a cap around all day to give the store more publicity. He initially gets inspired by the level of her commitment to the store, but after she places a cap on his head and starts walking him around like a living billboard, he prays to the reincarnation gods to take him back. Some baddies eventually see him, and after calling him cute, they proceed to tickle him a bit, which makes him even more embarrassed, so he prays that no one he knows actually sees him in this state. Meanwhile, Natsuno is currently boiling at home as she sees him on a blog post online. After the minor publicity stunt for the bookstore, Kazuhito and Yayoi return to the park, and Yayoi soon begins to cry, which makes Kazuhito speechless because he can't think of anything to make her feel better. Just then, he suddenly gets overwhelmed by fear as he hears Natsuno's scissors getting closer. The next moment, she accuses him of cheating and making a cute girl cry all in one day, before threatening to split him in two as punishment. Despite almost pissing himself in fear, he asks how she even knew where to find him, so she reminds him of the tracker she installed in his collar. Natsuno then turns to Yayoi and tells her to go back home, but she refuses and says they probably don't want her to come back because of what she said to her sister. However, Natsuno tells her not to worry about it because her sister must be worried sick about her safety. She further encourages her not to let something like that bother her and says she can relate because she also has an older sister that she occasionally cusses out when she gets upset. Yayoi then asks if she has ever worried about her sister hating, and Natsuno responds by suggesting that she apologized to her sister if she really doesn't like what she said earlier. Minutes later, Natsuno follows her back to the store, and as soon as Yayoi apologizes to her sister for what she did earlier, Her sister hugs her in return and promises that she wasn't even upset in the first place. Natsuno then suddenly asks about the store and says that one of her acquaintances is a die-hard fan who doesn't want it to be shut down. Upon hearing this, Yayui's sister, Sakura, gets surprised and says that the store is never going to close, even if their dad, who happens to be a slow-brained businessman, likes giving out more books than he sells. Sakura then asks where Natsuno heard that they were going to close, and after she points to Yayui, she explains that she heard their parents fighting and feared that they would split up, which would mean that the store would eventually close down. This catches them all off guard, as they never expected this entire issue to start from her own delusions. So Sakura explains that it wasn't actually a serious fight, even if their mom had spent the night beating up their dad. Just then, the old man crashes into the room, clearly happy that his wife, who is practically the man in the relationship, just manhandled him again. Sakura then says that this is just how boomers express their love and reassures Yayoi that their store is never closing down, causing her to finally feel happy again. A few days go by, and while Kazuhito gets buried in a book, Natsuno shows up, saying she's on a mission to find something and asks for his help. Without even looking, Kazuhito refuses and says he's going to sit this one out as he's still deep in his reading. However, this causes Natsuno to get pissed, so she casually threatens to give him unlimited reading time 6 feet under the ground and immediately gets his attention. Freaked out, he asks what exactly she's looking for, so she explains how she lost her black cup melon wraps. This surprises him, so he wonders if she even uses melon wraps since she is flat, but he decides to keep the thought to himself. However, since she can read his mind, she whips out her scissors to chop off his magnum, so he stops thinking to keep himself safe. She then decides to start the search immediately, but Kazuhito still tries to wiggle out of it by saying he sucks at finding lost stuff. Natsuno immediately claps back and reminds him that he is now a dog with a nose that should be able to sniff her plot covers from a mile away. Upon hearing this, the cultured weirdo dives straight for her chest and immediately gets whacked into the wall as she asks what the heck he thinks he's doing. He then explains he's just trying to get a whiff to help sniff out her missing plot cover, so she hides how good it makes her feel and allows him to come close again. All of a sudden, our depraved MC seizes this opportunity to cop a feel of her baby Peach's mid-sniff and ends up getting slammed into the wall again. After she calls him a dirty-minded failure for grabbing his master's goods without permission, he shrugs and asks why she is getting upset when there is barely anything to grab, so she attacks him and ties him up as punishment. Upon seeing this, Suzuna starts fantasizing about being tied up like that and wishes Natsuno would use a special scissor technique on her. Eventually, Natsuno lets Kazuhito loose, and Suzuna joins their search for her plot covers. Natsuno then adds that it's her favorite one to make them understand how important it is, so Suzuna asks for details to look out for. After describing it, she warns Kazuhito not to stare if he finds it, but then she notices that he isn't even with them anymore. She quickly tracks into the library and starts scolding him, but this time, Kazuhito decides that he has had enough and claps back. However, as he tries to stand on business, Natsuno throws her scissors straight at him. He manages to dodge it, but after slamming into a bookshelf, he causes a box to drop and finds a melon pump carefully stashed inside it. Kazuhito then praises Little Miss No Milkers for accepting her weak point and trying to fix it, even if there is nothing she can actually do to change it. As he tries to leave, she suddenly steps on his tail and shows him the scissors to remind him that she can choose to Uno with him anytime she pleases. With nowhere else to look, she decides to check the gym she used the day before. Suzuna then teases her for forgetting it there, saying she probably didn't even notice while working out. Natsuno, who is clearly fed up with the endless insults, then orders her to use her head as a hammer on the locker, and she excitedly rushes to obey until the brain trauma puts her to sleep. After that, Suzuna wonders if an underwear thief might be behind the disappearance, since there should be no other reason for her favorite plot covers to suddenly vanish. Natsuno then says that if it's the case, she will definitely end up in prison after finding the person, leaving Kazuhito to wonder if she has always been a sicko or if she actually trained herself to become this evil. Just as she says it should be impossible for a thief to get her prized possession, a bunch of gym bros show up, so Natsuno decides to stay for chess day while Kazuhito heads back home to read. While flipping through a book later on, Kazuhito suddenly spots something under his cover cloth and realizes that it's Natsuno's missing plot cover. This surprises him, and after thinking it through, he realizes that he probably grabbed it by accident while looking for something to sleep under the night before. Then he remembers Natsuno's death threats and panics. Meanwhile, during the chest workout, Natsuno realizes she's not building her melons, so she bails early and gets home only to see that her Under Armour drawer has been raided. At the same time, Kazuhito runs away from the house out of fear and imagines what she'll do if she figures out the truth. Minutes later, Natsuno starts searching for him and ends up at his usual bookstore. Sakura then tells her how popular he's become recently because locals always see him during grocery runs and his regular visits to the store. Natsuno initially brushes this off as the usual admiration until she says that his fur feels amazing whenever she carries him. This causes Natsuno to spiral into jealousy, as she now thinks that Kazuhito leaves the house to enjoy other women plot cannons while she's stuck at home using her melon pump. She then thanks her and heads out, but Sakura warns her that there's been a string of accidents in the area. Natsuno ignores this and continues her search, but starts getting more anxious when he doesn't turn up. At one point, she fears that someone might be following her but shakes it off when she sees no one. Meanwhile, Kazuhito, who is now deep in hiding, starts digging a grave to bury the cursed bra. The next moment, he hears singing and goes to investigate, only to see that it's a maid trying to delude herself into thinking that she can actually sing. Kazuhito recognizes the lyrics from a classic novel and decides to join in, but when he suddenly sneezes, the maid notices him and instantly panics because no one was supposed to witness her traumatizing concert. She immediately threatens to unalive him and transforms her broom into a weapon before chasing him around like a crazed lunatic. Back on the other side of town, Natsuno starts running in a random direction because she suddenly heard Kazuhito's brain screaming for help. Kazuhito, on the other hand, tries to dodge Sachi and nearly gets set back to heaven, so he jumps onto the road, only to see none other than Truck-kun barreling toward him. He immediately starts crying about getting unalived again before finishing all of Natsuno's books, but she shows up just in time and yanks him to safety. She then drops him and immediately whips out her scissors to face off against the unhinged maid. However, just as the battle's about to kick off, a roasted potato commercial starts playing nearby, and the maid dips, saying she feels like she and Natsuno are destined to clash again someday. Right then, Natsuno finds her plot cover on Kazuhito and gets super excited because it's got a dog print which she really likes. This surprises him since he expected more anger, but then she instantly switches back to her usual blood-hungry personality and threatens to erase his existence for touching it. Meanwhile, the strange man who's been watching her every move keeps lurking in the shadows. A few days later, Natsuno drags Kazuhito to what she calls a guest inn, but as soon as they enter, he becomes convinced that she accidentally booked a medieval war zone. The place is littered with dangerous weapons on display, and after staring in horror, Kazuhito asks if a Viking-themed horror movie is about to start, but Natsuno shuts him up immediately and tells him to just enjoy the atmosphere. As they explore the inn, Kazuhito's attention shifts to the one safe thing in sight, which happens to be a bookshelf. However, as he tries to dive into the sweet arms of literature, Madoka suddenly appears out of nowhere, scoops him up, and drops his face right onto her twin marshmallows. While Kazuhito is still muffled in shock, Madoka thanks Natsuno for inviting her. Natsuno then tells her there's no need to be so polite since they'll be sisters-in-law someday, which means they should get along. Upon hearing this, Kazuhito wonders how such a depraved psycho is so successful. They then head to their room, and as Madoka looks around, Kazuhito notes that it looks like the space was designed with Natsuno in mind. The next moment, Natsuno smiles and admits that it's because the place actually belongs to her, while he tries to wrap his head around what she just said. Madoka checks the bedroom and notices there's only one futon, so she offers to call for another one. But Natsuno suddenly gets shy, which makes Kazuhito suspicious of her intentions with his sister. As he begins to wonder if she is a master of the scissor technique, Natsuno launches him into the wall with her scissors. She then tells Madoka that she already arranged a separate room for her, and Madoka thanks her by immediately picking Kazuhito up like a teddy bear and carrying him toward her own room. Natsuno immediately cuts her off and says Kazuhito has to stay with her, but Madoka argues that she hasn't had enough sister time with her brother and tells Natsuno not to come between family. That ticks Natsuno off, but as she considers attacking, her alarm rings, interrupting the potential catfight. She then suggests that they hit the hot spring together, and shockingly, Madoka agrees to it, so Kazuhito watches them walk off like they didn't just threaten to unalive each other. Inside the spring, they run into Sakura and Hami, who are apparently there for a school trip. When Hami suddenly hides behind a rock in embarrassment, Sakura invites her to join, so she steps in, and Natsuno immediately notices that no one would struggle to see her melons even if she went full commando since they practically don't exist. Feeling extra self-aware, she turns her back to everyone and reads a mini-book, who is currently enjoying his book. Later that night, they head to the dining hall and find several tied-up figures hanging from the ceiling like they just lost a low-budget adaptation of Squid Game. Upon seeing that one of them is Suzuna, Natsuno scolds her for showing up uninvited yet again and tells her to kindly remove her useless self from the premises. Meanwhile, a mysterious man in a hat watches them from the window, but no one notices. The next day, the gang takes to the streets, and while walking, Kazuhito notices that Natsuno is deeply engrossed in a book, so he tries to pry into it, but she refuses to share. When they eventually get to a local bookstore, Natsuno runs into Sachi, the mischievous maid from the other night, who also gets surprised to see her again so soon. Just then, Natsuno spots a nearby whetstone and asks if it's hers. So Sachi proudly reveals that it's a top-tier brand she uses, which impresses Natsuno. After she leaves, Natsuno tells Kazuhito that she's going to buy the same one to sharpen her scissors back to lethal glory. Kazuhito, however, just wants to rest and regrets wasting an entire day on this sharp object obsession, so he asks if they can go back. Later, Madoka attempts to cook again, determined to make love-fueled dishes for Kazuhito, but she fails every recipe. She then wishes that she had her tuna eater knife with her, like that would have made a difference. Meanwhile, Natsuno secures her premium whetstone and immediately heads to the hot spring to give her scissors a glow-up. While she's doing that, Suzuna continues sitting in the hot spring with a cold look in her eyes, so Natsuno warns her to get out before she passes out. But Suzuna insists that she's aiming to achieve enlightenment through pain. Suddenly, the door opens and Suzuna perks up for a second, thinking salvation has arrived, only to see Maxi enter and ruin her hopes. Maxi then cannonballs into the spring and challenges Suzuna to an endurance match to see who lasts longer in steaming water. Inside the inn, Kazuhito suddenly sees that the staff have gone full zombie mode as they march with blades toward the bathhouse. He immediately sprints to warn Natsuno, but before he can get to her, the zombie horde breaks in. Natsuno instantly enters battle mode upon seeing them and claims to have seen this exact setup once before when a stalker followed her back home. While she prepares for war, Maxi suddenly becomes convinced that she is the main character, so she tries to stop them, but they walk past her like she's background noise. They then surround Natsuno and start to attack, so she fends them off using her half-sharpened scissors while wishing they were fully upgraded. The next moment, Kazuhito leaps in and starts flinging bath bowls like grenades to buy her time, causing her to feel stomach butterflies despite being in the middle of so much chaos. Just then, one of the employees tries to unalive Kazuhito, but Madoka crashes into the scene with a new knife and slices through them in an instant. This gives Natsuno enough time to finish sharpening her scissors, so the two of them start mowing down the employees with ease. Suddenly, Natsuno spots her favorite book lying on the ground, getting trampled by the employees, and this causes her inner demon to take over, sealing the fates of everyone that thought it would be a good idea to attack her. The next morning, the innkeeper apologizes profusely and claims the staff don't remember anything from the night before, probably because they got possessed or took too much crack. To avoid another attack, Natsuno and the crew check out, and as they walk away, Kazuhito complains about how they didn't even get to experience a proper vacation. Natsuno then reassures him that next time, it'll be just the two of them alone, but instead of feeling excited, he starts questioning his decision to live with her. A couple days later, Kazuhito and Natsuno stroll into the bookstore for another shopping spree. As they browse through the shelves, Sakura attends to them as usual, and Kazuhito uses that opportunity to casually ask Natsuno about her stalker situation. Without missing a beat, Natsuno boasts that she's been ambushed multiple times, but naturally she handled all of them with her scissors like it was nothing. However, her independent baddie act fails to impress Kazuhito, so he points out that at this stage, it's no longer a harmless stalker situation like the one she usually experiences. Right then, Natsuno spots their amateur creeper strolling past the bookstore like a background NPC. Unbothered, Sakura interrupts the moment to inform Natsuno that the book she once asked about has finally arrived. She hands it over with a smile, and Kazuhito immediately clocks it. It's the same book he saw at the hot springs not long ago, but sadly he didn't get the chance to read it. He then tries to act nonchalant about it to preserve his aura and says that even though he's clueless about who the author is, if Sakura thinks it's good, then it's probably worth a read. Shortly after this, they get back home, and the second they enter the apartment, Kazuhito's creep senses start to tingle because something feels off. Someone has clearly been inside, but of course, Little Miss Independent is as clueless as ever. This causes Kazuhito to get irritated by her carelessness, so he lectures her on how things don't just magically rearrange themselves in the apartment. He then explains that before they left, there were exactly 99,822 books in the house. Now there are 99,823 for some reason, which obviously means that someone added a book. Upon hearing this, Natsuno stares at him like he just solved world hunger. Shocked and slightly impressed, she asks how on earth he knows that. So Kazuhito seizes his moment of genius glory and continues schooling her on how to have common sense as an adult. Still, she struggles to believe that he noticed such a tiny detail, so she asks him to find the new book, and he immediately heads to the shelves to pull out the exact book Sakura gave them at the store. Both of them pause to make sure they are not experiencing a matrix glitch, and after minutes of brainstorming, their suspicion shifts to the stalker. Despite this, Natsuno remains confused, because how could anyone have entered without setting off the alarm system? Just then, she spots Kazuhito already reading and scolds him for indulging in his obsession during an active investigation. But Kazuhito defends himself, saying that the book could be their only lead. He argues that step one of any case is gathering clues, so he might as well read the one thing that started the investigation. Surprisingly, Natsuno agrees and starts flipping pages as well. Meanwhile, Sakura is proudly telling Hami that she gave Natsuno a copy of her book, which catches Hami off guard. Back at their place, Kazuhito finishes the book and starts giving a mini TED talk in his head, reflecting on how much he still needs to grow in the world of literature. But suddenly, he glances over and notices Natsuno deeply engrossed as well. His heart does a mini drum solo as he becomes intoxicated by the unholy thoughts flooding his mind. The next moment, he lunges straight for the melons, but at that exact moment, she casually sinks a half-quart shot into the trash can, causing his creepy sneak attack to flop harder than a sequel nobody asked for. After recovering from the immense aura loss, Kazuhito asks for her thoughts on the book. She then replies that the writing is suspiciously high level for someone new. She suspects the author must be an experienced writer using a new name. Kazuhito, however, says the book's style felt eerily similar to hers, and she agrees, admitting that she almost thought it was one of her books. Kazuhito then takes a moment of silence to think before deciding to figure out who the copycat is. They immediately jump online and run a search on the book to find that the author, Uzumaki Hotaru, is just as shady as Natsuno's pen name, Akiyama Shinobu. Wasting no time, Natsuno calls Suzuna and demands every bit of intel she has on the copycat. Suzuna initially refuses, but the moment Natsuno offers to reward each piece of information with a torture session, she gladly promises to do her best. A few brutal moments later, Suzuna enjoys her reward while Natsuno and Kazuhito look through all the information she could find. Turns out, the author is none other than the daughter of Shuzan, a legendary writer known as the Tiger of historical novels. With no time to waste, Natsuno suggests they go track her down, so they head out. But while they're walking through a familiar neighborhood minutes later, Kazuhito suddenly stops and reminisces about a time when he skipped exams just to buy Natsuno's books. Natsuno then ignores his admiration for her work and says he should have been studying instead. But Kazuhito tells her with all the riz he can muster that her books were way more important than any test. Unfortunately, the riz backfires, because Natsuno misinterprets it as him liking only her books and not the person behind it. While she gets triggered by her own delusions, the potentially unemployed stalker continues creeping in the shadows like some jobless anime villain. Kazuhito then leads her into a deserted building, but as they keep talking, Natsuno suddenly freezes because they are about to experience the hot springs incident all over again. Just like that night, some poor saps under mind control start to approach them like possessed mannequins. Without flinching, Natsuno grabs Kazuhito and throws him as fast as she can, causing him to pass out. When Kazuhito eventually regains consciousness, he sees the goons laid out like laundry on the floor while Natsuno towers over them. However, before they can even breathe, the stalker finalite appears and turns out to be none other than the legendary Shuzan. He starts by commending Natsuno's combat skills and says that must be why her novels hit so hard, but she ignores the poor attempt at being slick and ties him up faster than a cowboy on coke before demanding answers. Shuzan initially acts like he's some mafia don to intimidate her, but when she threatens to dropkick his nuts, he breaks character. The next moment, he starts begging, saying his bladder is about to betray him because his body's nearing its expiration date, but she refuses to listen to anything. She then demands to know how he got past her apartment's security, so Shuzan confesses that he had the head of the security company disable the system. Turns out the guy is a childhood friend who owes him a lifelong favor for keeping quiet about the time he soiled himself in school. This causes Kazuhito to get disappointed, as he was expecting some elite hacker twist, or at least something better. But Natsuno continues interrogating him and asks why he did all this sneaky nonsense. Shuzan then admits that his daughter wanted Akiyama Shinobu to read her book really badly. When Natsuno fires back and asks why he couldn't just mail it instead of this whole mission impossible routine, Shuzan awkwardly says he didn't want her to read it because he thinks she's a bad influence. He goes on to say that it's her chaotic energy that keeps attracting all these random mobs, but by then, she has fully accepted that he is just a creepy wuss that managed to get famous, so she cuts the rope and lets him drop. After processing everything, she concludes that maybe the real culprit might actually be Uzumaki herself, but Shuzan insists it was all him. He then asks if she can meet his daughter, so they get the address of her school, which turns out to be Kazuhito's old school. Once there, they split up, and Kazuhito quickly makes his way to the library to pull out some hidden books, just as he uncovers a document he once left there. Hami shows up out of nowhere and asks if he's really Kazuhito. He He instantly picks up on her last name, Osawa, and it finally clicks that she's the elusive author they've been hunting down all this time. The fact that she knows who he is surprises him the most, so he lets out a loud bark to ask how she figured it out. Hami then explains how Sakura once mentioned a weirdly loyal dog who regularly drops by the bookstore to buy books. From the moment she first heard that story, she had a gut feeling it was him. Still, she didn't fully buy it until she saw him grabbing the manuscript from where it had been hidden. With her crazy prediction being proven by the fact that he is still alive, she starts celebrating and brags about the fact that she kept her word by becoming an author. She goes on to reveal that while her dad's encouragement played a huge role in helping her get started as an author, she hasn't been able to write a single new piece since he got shot. She then admits that it makes her feel like a fraud, like she's just pretending to be an author. Her only shot at proving she belongs in the author club, she claims, is to surpass a real one, which is why she dragged Natsuno into her little experiment. While they continue talking, Natsuno finds herself inside one of the classrooms Kazuhito used to sit in and overhears Hami talking about having a special workout with him on the rooftop. Up on the rooftop a couple minutes later, Natsuno storms in and hits Kazuhito with a death stare powerful enough to induce a heart attack. Without wasting a second, she accuses him of being a double-crossing cheater, but just as she prepares to punish him, Ami jumps between them and tells Natsuno not to tarnish her reputation as a literary genius by squabbling like a street thug. Instead of a brawl, she suggests a writing contest, so the trio heads down to the library, where Natsuno and Ami sit across from each other like it's a final boss battle. Hami then lays down the rules and says that whoever finishes a 100-page manuscript first wins. With a dramatic woof from Kazuhito, the competition begins. Right off the bat, Hami starts to panic as she notices how fast Natsuno is writing. Out of desperation, she starts trying every trick in the book to catch up, but after countless fake cramps and dramatic sighs, nothing breaks Natsuno's laser focus. After accepting that Natsuno is just too locked in to be distracted, she decides to try something else and asks what Natsuno honestly thinks about her novel. Natsuno then glances up and calmly says that it barely qualifies to be called a book. Suddenly, Hami slams a button on her side of the table, and the bookshelves around them creak open, revealing mirrors tucked behind them like a magician's freak-off room. The next moment, Natsuno's eyes lock onto her reflection, and she immediately reaches for her scissors to stab herself in the face. Luckily, she manages to stop herself in time, so Hami reveals the twisted trick she baked into her book. She had laced it with specific phrases designed to implant subliminal commands into the mind of anyone that reads it, and that command is to attack Natsuno. Upon hearing this, Kazuhito starts putting two and two together as he realizes that it's why he suddenly pounced on Natsuno's jugs after reading the book. It also explains the random attacks by strangers that Natsuno's been dealing with recently. Hami, who is now standing tall and confident, declares that she'll fulfill her promise by taking Natsuno down for good. However, Natsuno refuses to go down easy, so she suddenly bites down on her pen and ignores the internal chaos to keep writing like her life depends on it because for once, it actually does. Despite Hami's mind control commands trying to take over, she manages to keep herself sane enough to write and manages to complete the story before her. In a not-so-surprising turn of events, Hami accepts that she is actually the weaker writer and proceeds to congratulate Natsuno for doing what she does best. She then reaches for her pen and gets ready to do something dramatic, but Kazuhito snatches it away before she can go off the rails. After he places the manuscript gently in front of her and starts wagging his tail, she gets confused, so Natsuno breaks the silence by explaining that he wants her to write. To clarify, Natsuno tells her that despite her earlier assumptions, her father never used his connections to win her the award for Best New Author. She won it all on her own, purely because she is basically the LeBron of writers. Still, Hami expresses a subtle but very clear discontent and mutters that she still doesn't feel like a real author. Upon hearing this, Natsuno tells her that being an author is simply about writing from the heart and having people that are interested in what you have written. For some reason, this very obvious explanation hits Hami in the deepest part of her miserable soul, so she slowly turns to Kazuhito and asks if he would read her next publication. Kazuhito responds with a loud bark just to make her feel better, and as her eyes prepare to explode with tears, Natsuno kneels down beside her and says she'd actually like to read the manuscript once it's complete. This further surprises Hami, so she hesitates before asking if Natsuno isn't mad at her, especially after everything she pulled. Natsuno then shrugs it off like it's old news, saying she's already over it. Upon hearing this, Hami loses control of her emotions and starts crying like she just discovered what it means to be validated for once. Through the tears, she sincerely thanks Natsuno for being kind, and in a touching moment of newfound respect, she calls Natsuno sensei. However, Natsuno immediately corrects her and demands to be called senpai instead. Hami then laughs through the tears and agrees to it. Several nights later, Maxie assembles a small army for her final attack against Natsuno. At her apartment the following day, Madoka offers to make some curry as a way of expressing her gratitude, and after agreeing to let her use the kitchen, Natsuno reminds her to stop acting so formal since they are now in-laws. As Madoka then heads into the kitchen to whip up something special, Kazuhito's insides start to turn as he reminisces on the life-threatening meals she made him in the past. Natsuno notices this and says he has to accept her food regardless of the taste, like every good brother should. He then tries to talk his way out of it, but the scent of her cooking surprises him because it's the first time she is making something nice. This causes him to get excited, so he promises to eat the entire pot until he gets close enough to see the witch potion she is preparing. Upon seeing the troubled look on his face, Natsuno reminds him of the promise he made just a few seconds ago. Later on, Kazuhito gets paralyzed by Yahyui's tickle torture but decides to put up with it because she at least won't force him to eat the abomination Madoka prepared. Unfortunately, his peace of mind gets stolen again as Maxie's goons barge in like they're staging a hostile takeover and proceed to scoop up every copy of books written by both Natsuno and Himehari Momiji. Upon seeing this, Kazuhito decides to tail them, but this leads him to experience another insanity as he walks past his landlady and sees that she is walking with the innkeeper. The fact that they both look like clones causes his brain to spiral out of control as he starts considering the fact that everything about his life is one big conspiracy theory or experiment using him as the lab monkey. Eventually, he ends up at the park and finds himself in yet another life-threatening situation as Sachi suddenly shows up and decides to give Mother Nature another concert. After remembering what happened last time, he tries to slowly make his way out, but an unlucky branch exposes him to the psychotic maid. Her eyes immediately lock onto him like a shark who just perceived blood, and just as he considers making a run for it, she charges in to attack him. Thankfully, the fact that he has to escape Natsuno's scissors every day gives him the ability to easily evade every attack. But Sachi refuses to quit and continues attacking until Natsuno shows up to save him. Sachi quickly takes a step back to avoid the Scissor Princess's attack and decides to reveal that she is actually a secret agent codenamed Shadow Servant. Upon hearing this, Natsuno pays close attention to her stance and realizes that she is actually not bluffing, so she prepares for her most dangerous fight yet. However, they suddenly get interrupted by a military chopper and wonder who could be dropping in with so much aura until Maxie steps out and immediately starts yapping about how amazing she is. She then lands and acts like they should be grateful to be in her presence before saying that she bought all those books at the store because she can't stand the idea of being compared to the both of them as an author. The next moment, she gives her guards the signal, so they pull off a huge tarp to reveal the infamous 9-story tower. Natsuno immediately recognizes it, and Maxie seizes the moment to climb dramatically to the top in Aura Farm. She then challenges the both of them to a writing contest to decide who is actually the best author. However, before they can even begin processing this nonsense, Sachi snaps and charges toward Maxie's bodyguards. Upon seeing this, she orders them to fight back, so they spread out across the top to combine their strengths only to get blown away in an instant by a single attack from her. She then cusses at Maxie for being stupid enough to think that she is better than her master, but the real shock sets in when they all realize that her master is the country's top-rated author. After Maxie promises to wipe the floor with anyone who challenges her master, Natsuno decides to show them why she is the new top author idol and accepts the challenge. She immediately heads up the tower to throw hands, but just as they all prepare for the battle royale, one of Maxie's bodyguards picks her up like a ragdoll and heads out, leaving Sachi and Natsuno confused. A few days later, Suzuna casually shows up at Natsuno's place like she owns it, but instead of a welcome, she gets greeted with a brutal silent treatment from cold Natsuno, who doesn't even glance her way and completely focuses on her work, while she remains laser-focused and locked in at her desk, typing like the fate of the universe depends on it. Kazuhito gets confused since she isn't usually this focused, so he takes a closer look and notices that she is using Morse code to tell him to ignore Suzuna. For once, he agrees to her demands without making a fuss, but as he tries to ignore Suzuna, she only enjoys it even more and asks if he really has the heart to keep it up while she explodes with happiness. This causes him to get more concerned about the shameless creep, so he asks why she suddenly decided to show up. Suzuna then reminds him that she only receives pleasure from Natsuno's coldness before revealing her grand plan to push Natsuno into revealing her identity as a famous author to the public. According to her, if Natsuno starts doing interviews and making appearances like all the other best-selling writers, the peer pressure might guilt-trip her into finally finishing the last book of the Deadly Sins series. Before Kazuhito can finish raising another eyebrow in suspicion, Suzuna launches phase 1 of her grand plan. After pulling out a massive stash of costumes like a magician pulling endless scarves from a hat, she activates an ability to control time and space itself just to bring her plan to life and make sure Natsuno sees the vision. The next moment, she starts putting Natsuno into a bunch of different outfits and changes her origin story every couple of seconds to figure out which one will connect to her audience. Thankfully, as soon as her psychosis starts leading toward a freaky swimsuit costume, Natsuno finally decides to act and subjects her to a punishment that leaves her twitching like a meth addict. After minutes of torture, Suzuna's brain nudges back into place, so Natsuno returns to her writing like nothing happened. However, Suzuna refuses to give up after just one scissor-related beatdown. For her second grand plan, she decides to use the power of alcohol to her advantage to finally reveal Natsuno's true feelings, because she always hides them behind a fake nonchalant baddie act. For this to actually work though, she has to sneak it into a drink or something because Natsuno hates taking shots while working. As she starts cooking up the plan, Kazuhito tries to prevent yet another disaster and insists that there's no way Natsuno would fall for such a stupid trick. Suzuna then tells him to sit back and watch, so he says a prayer for her soul and prepares to see another beatdown. The next moment, Suzuna slips some whiskey into Natsuno's coffee at the speed of light. At first, he struggles to accept that she actually poured it in, so she replays the exact same scene just to show him how fast she moves when it's time to get serious. She and Kazuhito then watch from the sidelines as she takes a huge sip and practically swallows the entire thing without flinching. After she drops the cup and continues writing, they both start to think that she has a high tolerance, but then she suddenly stands up and carries Kazuhito before speaking to him in the sweetest tone he has ever experienced, while Kazuhito freezes in shock and wonders how alcohol could change her entire personality. Suzuna gets crushed because she was expecting an even darker version of Natsuno. She then decides to try speaking to her, just in case she only became affectionate towards Kazuhito, but Natsuno gives her the exact same treatment as well. This causes Suzuna's heart to stop beating for a couple of minutes, but she eventually pulls herself back together and decides to fix it by giving Natsuno even more whiskey to drink. In a not-so-shocking turn of events, Natsuno becomes even sweeter and tries to spend quality time with her for the first time in ages. But hearing all these swords deep fries what's left of Suzuna's brain, so she withers away in pain. Natsuno then returns to her favorite puppy and tries to make up for all the time she tried to chop off his furry glizzy, but he also refuses to accept this new soft side and decides to bring her back by talking about her mini melons. Instead of trying to unalive him for the disrespect, she gets sensitive about it and says there's nothing she can do to grow them, causing him to feel a little bad for her. However, he still takes it a step further by saying that implants won't be able to help because all that's left are her ribs. For some reason, Natsuno's new personality shuts off his negativity and sends her on a trip to La La Land, where she imagines getting married to him and spending their honeymoon doing all the freaky stuff he loves. She even starts talking about getting stuff for the little ones she will give birth to and suddenly decides to practice some of their special moves. In the bedroom, without even giving him a chance to breathe, she pins him down to finally get a taste of his sausage, but she suddenly pukes, potentially saving him from what would have been the most traumatic experience of his life. Some time later, she takes one sniff of Kazuhito's fur and almost throws up again, but he immediately tells her not to even bother roasting him because it's all her fault. Unapologetic, Natsuno casually tells him to leave her apartment and not return for at least a month since he can't take accountability for his actions. Then, she suddenly says she kind of liked the soft version of herself better, shocking Kazuhito, who then tries to make sure his ears are actually working. When she suddenly offers to give him a bath, Kazuhito stares in disbelief, unsure if it's a trap or if he is about to experience every creepy otaku's dream. When he finally decides to accept his one good streak of luck, Natsuno changes her mind to handle something else. She then hands him a stack of papers that turns out to be an early draft of the long-awaited final volume of The Deadly Sin. Kazuhito, whose entire reason for existing seems to be obsessing over this series, immediately lights up like a Christmas tree and flips through the pages at lightning speed to take in as much as he can. Afterwards, she asks for his thoughts, and he basically calls her greatest piece yet a below-average write-up that could have ended much better if she actually had enough brain cells left to write properly. As soon as the words leave his mouth, he realizes his mistake, but before he can apologize, she grabs the scissors to send him back to heaven. Will Kazuhito ever get to clap Natsuno? Or is he destined to watch from the sidelines and occasionally get assaulted for no reason? Comment Furry Pickle to find out, and don't forget to turn on post notifications after subscribing to make sure you never miss any of our recaps.